Hello, I'm Helen Bradley. Welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can create a spiral shape repeating pattern in Illustrator. Before we get started with this tutorial, let's have a look and see what it is that we're trying to achieve. I'm going to show you how you can create a repeating pattern like this in Illustrator. We're going to take advantage of the new pattern make tool that was new in Illustrator CS6 and of course is still in Illustrator CC. So let's get started. I'm starting with a brand new document. Mine is 1000 by 1000 points in size, but yours can be any size that you like. I'm just setting a color for my stroke. I'm going to use a blue this time and no fill. The tool I'm using is the spiral tool. It's an open path tool, so it shares a toolbar position with the line, segment, arc, and of course spiral and a couple of grid tools, but it's the spiral tool that we want. I'm just going to click here to test and see what I've got. Well, I've got a spiral with 10 segments, an 80% decay, and a radius of just over 50 points. That looks just fine to me, so I'm just going to click to create that spiral. I do want a wider line though, so I'm going to set mine to 6 points. And now to continue, I'm going to create a second spiral. And now I'm just going to click on my document because I want the dialog to reappear. And this time I'm going to choose a spiral that goes in a different direction. And I'm going to create a couple of those. And then perhaps 2 more just to finish off. I'm going to move these spirals in so that they're pretty close to each other because I want them all to be within a small area. And then I'm going to create just a square. So I'm going to hold Shift as I drag a rectangle shape over the top of my spirals. I want it to surround my spirals because this ultimately is going to be the pattern that I'm going to make. I'm going to get rid of the square, but it's going to help me initially make sure that my pattern size is all very manageable. So I'm going to select over all of these shapes so that they're all selected, and now I'm going to choose Object, Pattern, Make. And I'm going to click OK because a new pattern has been added to the Swatches panel, and now I get to set up my pattern. Well, I need to do a few things here right now. You can see that I have Show Tile Edge turned on, but unfortunately the tile edge is blue, as is my pattern, so that's not helping me very much right now. I'm just going to dim these copies down to about 30% so I can see exactly which one is my pattern. Now this is the rectangle, it's actually a square, that I created earlier, and I want to get rid of it, so I'm just going to select it and press Delete. And that removes it from the pattern, but you can see that my tile is a square. What that square gave me is a square shaped tile. It just makes life a little bit easier in a minute to get things sorted out. Now I'm going to start moving my pattern pieces around because I want them to intersect with other pieces. I can resize them, so I can hold the Shift key as I drag them out to make them a little bit bigger in size. Or I can hold the Shift key as I squeeze them up to make them a little bit smaller. Now as I do this, I may find that the stroke width is going to change. In fact, it's not. My settings are such that the stroke width is not changing, but if your stroke width does change, you'll need to be able to adjust that. So you just select your shape and go back and make sure that you still have a 6-point line. Now any of these spirals can be duplicated. I'm just going to hold the Alt or Option key as I drag another spiral away. And of course I can rotate them too by just dragging on the spiral to rotate it. So I need a few more spirals here, and I also need to start moving these so that they touch each other but so that they don't overlap. Just going to continue to copy them, rotate them, and just try and fill in this pattern a little bit. Here I'm just going to reflect this shape that I have selected. I'm going to reflect it across the vertical axis and just click OK. So it's possible to reflect these horizontally or vertically as well as rotating them. You want to do this to get a little bit of visual interest into the pattern so that everything's not pointing in the same direction. Now I'm going to start moving these using just the arrow keys because that's going to allow me to get in with some very fine movement. I'm also going to dim my copies a little bit less, so probably up to about 60%, so I can start seeing how this is all going to fit together. So I'm going to select on a shape with the selection tool and then just move it into position. You can see that if I move this shape and this one, each towards the edge of the pattern, they're going to start intersecting. So these two are actually intersecting with each other. I think this one needs to be a bit bigger, so with the shift key I'm just going to drag to make it a little bit bigger and then move it back into position. I want all of these shapes to touch, but I also want the ends to be a little bit more interesting, so I want them to sort of overlap each other at the ends. This is going to take a little bit of work to get them all to line up. So you can see here that I've got a shape that finishes in another shape, so I don't have any ends left out. And I kind of like my pattern to be like that. That's how the original pattern was. So I'm going to look to tuck all my ends in place, and that's going to mean I need to make each shape butt into another shape. Just going to size this one up a little bit so it's a little bit closer to this one over here. I think I've actually taken it up a little bit too far. I'm going to rotate it a bit more so that its end is right here, positioned over the top of the other one so that they're intersecting. In fact, let's just intersect both of these by going up here a bit and then rotating again. Now, if your shapes are butting up pretty close but not exactly, let's just go in here and let's see what the problem is. The problem is that there is an ending here. This is the end, the anchor point, and it's not exactly over this shape. Well, I can make it go over this shape. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, going to select the direct selection tool this time, and targeting just this point, I'm just going to move in a little bit. And so I've actually reshaped the end of that spiral so that it hooks into this other shape. And I'm going to continue to do that, so I'm going to come back in a few minutes when I've got this a little better organized. Now I'm a little bit further along with this spiral pattern, but I've come to a situation here where I want to keep this spiral, but its tail is not long enough. Well, I'm going to grab the pen tool here and I'm going to click on the last anchor point in the tail of this spiral, and then I'm going to click here because I'm going to continue this spiral along a little bit, so I'm making up for the piece that I don't have. And in these spirals where you can see that they're very, very tight in the middle, well, I'm going to get rid of the first or second of these anchors. So I'm going to click here with the minus anchor point tool, and I'm going to click on the very end of this spiral, and that'll take out one of the anchors, and I can take out more than one if I need to. So I can effectively open up the middle of these very small spirals by removing the innermost anchor point, or two of them if I need to. So let's just zoom out and just see how we're going here. Well, everything's pretty nicely closed up. I just need to add a couple of spirals in here and then I'm pretty near done. So I'm going to stop the video and continue to do this. Now I've just finished creating the last of my spirals, and I've just moved the tail of it so it intersects with this line here. I think I'm pretty near done here, probably just moving this one just a little bit so that it's attached to these other shapes, and maybe even resizing it is required here. And of course once I resize it, then its tail goes too far, so I need to rotate it or shorten its tail. So I'm just going to see if rotating this one will solve the issue, and perhaps just again moving it down just a little bit so that it touches more shapes than it did. Before I finish with this, I'm just going to double check it by turning off this dim copies, because I want to see everything at full strength. I want to see exactly where my joins are, and then I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and just test to see what it looks like as a repeating pattern. I think I've got a few issues here. I'm seeing a little bit too much of a boxy look, so I think I need to move this shape here into this area. So let's just go and do that. I'm just going to resize things a little bit so that I can see the element that I'm interested in. I think this is causing me a few problems. I think if I transform it and just reflect it across the y-axis and perhaps rotate it and then move it down into position, it's going to stop this looking quite so much like there is a border, like there is that sort of box that we had when we started off here. I'm just going to move it a little bit here, resize it a bit. Let's just zoom out and I'll see what I might do here. I might add another piece in here. So I'm just going to continue to work on this a little bit. I'm not 100% happy with these holes in the pattern, so I'm going to fill them with some other spirals before we get going and finalize the pattern. Now I've continued to work on my pattern, looking at it both close up and from a distance just to see how it's looking, and I found that I needed to make some of these shapes a little bit smaller and to create some additional shapes to fill the gap. So I'm continuing to work in and out and just testing to see what I think of the overall pattern. Now I'm pretty happy with this right now, so now I'm looking at the joins on the edges here. So I'm looking at what happens when the pattern is just repeated to see whether I like the result and make sure that there are no problems. So I've just hidden my tile edge so we can't see where the tile edge even is here, so we can have a look and see just how the pattern would look in reality if we were using it. And I'm really happy with that. I'm thinking it's looking really, really good for what I want. So I can turn the tile edge back on so we can see actually where our pattern piece is. And if I'm happy with that, all I need to do is to click done. And this has now been created. This piece that we created originally has now been created as a pattern. So we don't need these pieces at all. So I'm just going to select them and delete them because they're not actually my pattern. I'm going to press Ctrl and 0 so that I can see the artboard, and I have a special script that I use to create a rectangle the size of the artboard, but you can just go and do that manually. Just make a rectangle that is the size of the artboard and then select it. I'm going to target the fill of this shape. I'm going to click on my spiral because there we're filling the shape with our new spiral pattern. And if we want to see it smaller, we can do so with this rectangle still selected. I'm going to choose Object, Transform, Scale. I want to be able to preview what's happening, but I don't want to transform my object. I want my object to stay the size of my artboard, but I do want to transform my pattern. So I'm just going to start decreasing this and just testing it until I get it to the size that I want. And I think I'm going to settle for about 40%. That's a nice little pattern size for me, and click OK. So there's a way of creating a spiral repeating pattern inside Illustrator. You're going to start with a few spirals to work with, and then you're going to resize them, rotate them, and move them into position so that they're touching each other. For the very tight spirals, you'll want to come in with the minus anchor tool or the delete anchor point tool and click on the anchor points in the very center of the spiral just to open up the middle. And if you find that your ends, the ends of your spirals, aren't quite meeting an adjacent spiral, then click on the end with the direct selection tool. You want to select on the very end anchor point of that spiral and then just move it into position so that it is over the top of the adjacent spiral. A spiral like this, of this detail, might take you probably about 30 minutes to create by the time you've moved in and out to have a look and see how things are going and that you're happy with the repeat. But it's a fairly simple process once you understand the bits that you need to do to create it. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this YouTube video tutorial. Look out for more video tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.